as the Afghan refugees set out to resettle in communities throughout the United States, it is critical for the groups welcoming and facilitating this settlement will ensure an encouraging and meaningful settlement in the new communities. This integration process goes beyond the assumption of goodwill or common know-how to help the refugees. It involves a positive and holistic settlement entailing a sensitivity of their culture, religion, and history of the refugees and the actual people concerned. In addition to the settlement process, it will require essential religious connections and sensitivities, as well as the trauma evaluation and counseling. Further, Afghan families may fear an introduction into American societies, fearing prejudice toward Muslims. To this end, those involved in the settlement should possess sensitivity of their experience with a view to supporting a restorative integration process. This healing will include cultural empowerment and the availability of culturally responsive resources within the Islamic community, where they may receive religious guidance and a mosque or a place for daily prayer. It is important to be sensitive and respectful of the importance of faith as a way of life. This could be complicated because of language barriers. To promote a positive outcome of the resettlement process, which integrates a process of healing, we have organized a webcast on restorative Afghan refugee settlement and integration. The discussion will include expert presentations focusing on the Afghan people, their history, their faith, so that the refugee resettlement process is positive and restorative. Our speakers are both professionally capable and are experts in their fields of refugees and humanitarian assistance, as well as diplomacy. And also, several of our experts have walked in these shoes. They know what it means to be a refugee, and so they are more than empathetic to this process. So without further ado, we're going to begin our program. Our first speaker will provide a reflection on the resilience of Afghanistan and Afghan people. And that presenter is Ambassador Ahmad Kamal. I've had the great honor to have worked or reported to Ambassador Kamal. Excuse me? Work at the United Nations with Ambassador Kamal. He is the former permanent representative of the permanent mission of Pakistan to the United Nations. I believe he served 12 years as permanent representative. He also has served as Pakistan's ambassador to France, Switzerland, and South Korea, and he is also an advisor to Grace Initiative. So without further ado, Ambassador Kamal, we're looking forward to your reflections.
Thank you very much. Afghanistan is a mix of cultural entities. In the eastern part of Afghanistan, you have the Kyrgyz, which is the country, the territory to the east of Afghanistan. In the north of Afghanistan, you have Kazakhstan. So you have the Kazakhs, you have the Uzbeks, you have the Hazaras in the middle. And the southern part of Afghanistan is the Pashtuns who speak Pashto. And so it's a multicultural territory which has had a long history. Afghanistan doesn't have very good climate. It's cold most of the time, though it can get very hot in summer. And so the Afghans have a tendency to try to move out. Some of them moved down into Pakistan. There are millions who are now in Pakistan. Some of them moved west through Iran into Jordan and into Europe and America. And so you have a number of Afghans who are seeking refuge in other countries in the West. That being said, Afghanistan has had a long and very important history, because from the 10th century onwards, the Afghan leaders have moved out. You had one by the name of Ghori Ibrahim Ghori, Ghori, who moved down into what was then India. and occupied parts of it and picked up whatever he could and took it back to Afghanistan. Then after him came another Afghan leader called Mahmud Ghaznavi, 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 who also came to India, picked up whatever he could, took everything back to Afghanistan, and then let India alone. Then came a very, very famous Afghan who was really a Kyrgyz in origin, whose name was Babar. Babar came to Afghanistan from Kyrgyzstan, from Afghanistan to what was then India, fought a major battle in India called the Battle of Panipat, Panipat, defeated the Indians, took over part of India, and then settled in the northern part of India. The British got very worried and decided to invade Afghanistan. Now, the Afghans have, as I told you, it's a multicultural ethnicity country. But there's one thing which unites them very much, which is that they hate foreigners. I repeat, they hate foreigners. And so when the British moved with an army into Afghanistan, the Afghans surrounded the British army, liquidated them totally, killed them all except one. And that one person, they deliberately let him alive so that he could get back home and tell everybody in the world what had happened to the Afghan army, which literally had been liquidated to zero. That was the British experience. People did not quite learn. One of the people who did not learn was the Soviets, who decided to invade Afghanistan. And having invaded Afghanistan, they occupied almost all of it totally. And then the Afghans decided to kick the Soviets out. And so after a few years, the Soviets got back into their tanks and rolled back into the Soviet Union, leaving Afghanistan alone with its hate of foreigners. That was the Soviet experience in Afghanistan. Then others were tempted. The Indians, the Chinese, the Pakistanis, everybody tried to interfere in Afghanistan. And having interfered, they lost, because you cannot occupy Afghanistan. And the country which has lost most badly is the United States, which is a huge superpower. And it went in, occupied the whole of Afghanistan, stayed there for several years, and then just had to leave, lock, stock, and barrel. And so what you have opened your statement with about Afghan refugees is a result of the US occupation of Afghanistan over the period of 20 years. Now, I don't know whether you know what is 20 years. It's a lifetime. And so for a lifetime, Afghanistan has been occupied by an American army, which is no longer there. And so Afghanistan is back in its own pursuit of its own future. And it will have a future. It is not going to be a country that is totally dependent on you or anybody else. It has been a territory in which the people get along with each other. It's a poor country, but it survives. And it has survived reasonably well for decades, if not centuries. And so we have the problem of Afghanistan, of a country occupied by many, the British, the Soviets, the Americans, and others, and which does not like foreigners. And so the question is, what are we going to do with Afghanistan? It's a poor country. So do not expect it to have a standard of living comparable to what we have in other parts of the world. Now, I told you that one of the major people who entered Afghanistan was a person from Kyrgyzstan called Babar. Babar came to Afghanistan in the 14th century. And from Afghanistan, he didn't quite like the weather. So he came into India. And he fought a major battle, the Battle of Panipat, which he won. And so he established what is called the Mughal dynasty in India at the end of the 14th century. And the Mughal dynasty lasts for 400, 500 years until the British decided to enter India and to knock the Mughals out. And so Babur, who had entered India from Afghanistan, was always in love with Afghanistan. And so when he was dying, he said, I don't want to be buried in India. I want to be buried in Afghanistan. So Babur's tomb is in Kabul today. That was the Mughal dynasty, which ruled India for 500 years. And so there you are. You have in Afghanistan, poor, multi-ethnic, getting along poorly but reasonably well in a country which is very cold in winter and very hot in summer. Likes to move out. Lots of Afghan refugees. They are by the millions in Pakistan. Many of them moved into Iran, into Jordan, into Syria, into Italy, Germany, Greece, Britain, and the United States. And so the question really is, what are we going to do with a country or a territory which has lasted centuries, which is poor? That's all right. They get along. There's enough to eat. And if they can't find enough to eat, they move as refugees into one of the neighboring regions. The neighboring regions in the east, north, and west are not very hospitable. So they come into India or Pakistan. There are millions in Pakistan today, or into Greece, Europe, United States. And so that being said, I will wait for you to ask me any questions that you might have about Afghanistan, its future. But please do not think of Afghanistan only as a refugee country with refugees in the United States. It's much longer history than that. Goes over centuries. So back to you for questions from your end. Over to you. Can you hear me?
Oh, thank you. I don't have any question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Aga?
To a person who has currency on this whole situation, that's Zahur Hussain, who was in Afghanistan for 3.5 years as an interpreter and worked with the Afghan forces and the U.S. Army as well as everybody. I don't have any questions, but I would relate to you that the problem that we should really focus on the problem that we're facing right now, the problem at hand, and that's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Okay. I guess I would like to ask you just one question, Ambassador Kamal. Thank you so much for your sort of historical perspective. We can go back to further comments and questions at the end of the presentation. Our next speaker, or our next two speakers, I should say, are going to reflect on both their personal and professional experience in working with refugees and also being a refugee. Our first speaker will be Mr. Mohammed Qasim Popal, who is an Afghan national. He is also a lawyer settled in Toronto. He served with the UN mission in Afghanistan for 10 years, working in the area of humanitarian coordination. And our second speaker also will be speaking from professional experience in developing an organization working with refugees and also having been a refugee. And it's Dr. Khaldoon Al-Musawi, who is a medical doctor and also has a master's in public health. And he is the founder and executive director of Mercy Hands for Humanitarian Aid. So, Mohammed, would you like to lead?
Excuse me, Ivan.
Yes.
I interrupt for a second. You also I would appreciate if you could give a chance at the end to Mr. Zahur Hussain.
I am. I have him on the agenda.
Yeah, to share his experiences and his ability.
I will. Okay.
Hi, everyone again. Thank you, everyone, especially Ms. Kamal, for a great presentation of what's happening in Afghanistan. My name is Mohammed. A quick briefing. I have worked with the United Nations Assistance Mission in Afghanistan for 10 years. And then I moved to Toronto. And Toronto, I work with multiple nonprofit organizations. And for the last 5 or 6 years, approximately, I work in immigration law firm, working with Afghan refugee directly to resettle them in Canada. Overall, I'm just focusing on my experience as a UN worker in Afghanistan, and then I'll move on. And lastly, I'll speak about what am I doing now in terms of the Afghan evacuation process. So overall, and during my tenure in the United Nations, mostly I was involved in international development and working with multiple UN agencies across Afghanistan on different perspectives, first humanitarian and development. And we work with the partners, external partners like UN agencies, international NGOs, allies, NATO forces, PRT, we call provincial reconstruction teams, across Afghanistan to move. And then on 2012, I moved to Canada and I'm settled here now. So, but again, which I have interest in assisting the refugees and the IDPs in Afghanistan. And so I did my master's degree in policy and law and immigration law. And then I started my another career as a immigration consultant here. And then mostly I was involved in people who are assisting, who need assistance in terms of their resettlement in Canada or other countries. So sadly, what was happening in Afghanistan because of those proxy war and neighboring pushed war in Afghanistan. I was in Afghanistan in August, and I was a witness one of the one of the historical moment of the time in modern history, the fall of Afghanistan. Well, I'm not calling it a fall of Kabul or fall of Afghanistan. I'm just technically call it with the terminology which is called handover Afghanistan, because the country was not fall to the Taliban, it was handover to the Taliban. In overall, I was there, and from the maybe 1 week before the handover of Afghanistan, I started assisting a lot of Afghans with their evacuation. And the first batch was 60 families of Afghan journalists and media workers to move to Canada, and we submitted their application to an embassy in Kabul, and then we started their application, advising legally how to move on. And likely their application were accepted, and then I was also one of those evacuees from Afghanistan, and then I was evacuated by the military along with all those people who were intended to come to Canada, and plus these 60 families. So from that end, I start because the situation, the people who were there, and I don't know whether this group we have someone who were witnessed those moments which was happening in Afghanistan on 15th of August, in evacuation for next 15 days. It was a very bad moment of life. So I promised with myself to really help Afghans to resettle, not only in Canada, but all across the country, all across the world. I can assist them in terms of their legal perspective, especially how to approach with the UNHCR, how to proceed their paperwork, whether it's a Canadian immigration or it's a German immigration process. So for the last 4 months, I'm deeply involved in resettling Afghans. And based on my experience, it's one of the noble jobs that I'm doing. And likely that by that time, the Canadian government also announced that they are resettling at first with 20,000, then it's at 40,000, but now I'm sure it's going up. And now they're selling approximately 40,000 Afghan national to Canada based on 2 categories. The first category, which is mostly on people who work with Canadian government as an interpreter, cook, driver, and instructor. And the second category is based on 5 bases, or they are qualified for categories. First, they should be journalists or advocates. Second, should be women leaders, LGBTQs, and people who work with Canadian non-NGO workers, and also people who has some types of relation that has helped Canadian journalists in the future. In that time that will enhance the Canadian perspective in Afghanistan, which is also coming in the next few years. So we are now, I'm focusing on one particular field, that evacuating Afghans, journalists, and women activists who are coming to Canada. We are dealing them, mostly involving them to evacuate them from Afghanistan to Pakistan, and from Pakistan to third country, mostly this Macedonia, because some of people who have been evacuated to Pakistan, they're not also feeling safe. Well, I'm not talking on the politics side, but whatever, they're not feeling, but they also move to another country, and the process is ongoing. So now we have people in process. We have three types of people who are in Afghanistan, and in their people are in the process to be evacuated third country, like Turkey, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, or to Macedonia. And the second group of people we have, that there are approximately cleared for Pakistan or cleared for Canada, and approximately they have some of them have already taken their visas, Canadian visa, and they're on the way to come to Canada. So overall, this is all what I'm doing now, and I'm here in the Canadian part also. I'm assisting some nonprofit organization, and we're selling Afghans because most. Luckily, Canadian government is so generous and so kind, because most people who, approximately all the people who have come to Canada for the last 4 months, they're settled in 5-star hotels. They have good accommodation. They have food. That they have donation centers. And they're well equipped. So, but the system is very slow in terms of their green card. We call it PR card, permanent residency card. But overall, the entire process is slow, but it's very efficient. Of course, I'm not saying the system is perfect, but still there is a room for improvement, and still different partners, especially nonprofit organization, of a bunch of volunteers on the ground in Afghanistan and other countries. Here, they're all working tirelessly to improve the prospect of this evacuation, this happening very smoothly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I am
Welcome.
deeply impressed, jealously impressed by your background. But I would like to tell you that I myself am also a refugee. I was born in what was then British occupied India, so a British colony in 1947, when India and Pakistan became independent. My father, who was then the Solicitor General to the government of India, decided that we were going to migrate to Pakistan. So we left all our lands and belongings, all in India, and came over to Pakistan. And I remember that when my father became the Solicitor General to the government of Pakistan, his desk was a large wooden crate, and his chair was a smaller crate on which he would sit and work. And that was how Pakistan was created and governed. But that being said, where I have a minor disagreement with you is on the fact that the problem of Afghanistan, which is about 40 million Afghans, cannot be resolved in Canada or Pakistan or the United States or any other country. It has to be resolved in Canada itself. And that is what we should be concentrating on. Instead of trying to pick up these people from other countries and resettle them in hundreds or thousands in Canada, United States, etc. It is in Afghanistan that we should try to be creating small factories so that jobs can be created in Pakistan, in Afghanistan itself, so that the Afghans can earn a living in Afghanistan and create a better and more prosperous territory in which they have lived for centuries. So that being said, we have a lot of work to be done in Afghanistan. And I'm sorry, we are not doing as much as we should be doing. It's not enough to have summit conferences. What we need is to create small factories. And so if you can create a small factory for anything, I don't care whether it's a factory which creates drinks or paper or pens or whatever. That is what we need in Afghanistan so that jobs can be created and people. And once you begin creating jobs, it always blossoms and spreads. And so jobs will create more jobs. And so Afghanistan will be back in happiness at a certain stage.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, we have to move forward. Dr. Khaldoon Al-Musawi.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Really, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you, Mr. Kamal and Mr. Mohammed, for the great presentation. Well, like Yvonne said, I'm originally from Iraq. I was born in Baghdad. I'm not just a refugee. I'm also an IDP, internally displaced person. I was displaced when I was a teenager during the 1991 war on Iraq, and then in 2014 I became a refugee here in the United States. But before that, in 2004, right after the war in 2003, the war on Iraq and the fall of Saddam regime, I founded Mercy Hands for Humanitarian Aid, a local NGO. The headquarters is in Baghdad. It has grown since then. It's one of the biggest Iraqi humanitarian NGOs. We operate nationwide all over Iraq. We also had a small mission in Northeast Syria. But in 2019, I co-founded Mercy Hands Europe, which is an international humanitarian NGO based in Geneva. And in 2020, I co-founded Mercy Hands America, which is based here in the US. We've been providing support to refugees since 2005 through Mercy Hands for Humanitarian Aid, or Mercy Hands Iraq, if you will. First, we worked on Sudanese, Palestinian, Iranian, and Syrian refugees. That was in 2005 after the fall of Saddam regime. Those refugees were in Iraq before the fall of regime. They were seen as supporters of Saddam. So after the fall of the regime in 2003, they were basically targeted by the locals because they, like I said, they were seen as supporters of Saddam. We provided support and help to them in partnership with UN agencies, mainly UNHCR. Our focus at that time was to provide legal aid and help them with resettlement and for some of them repatriation, going back to their country of origin, which was voluntary. I mean, it was not enforced or coerced. So that was our first experience with refugees in 2005, and we worked with them for a few years. Currently, we focus on providing support to Syrian refugees in Iraq, and to a lesser extent, we're actually getting some Afghani refugees. Most of them, they arrive Iraq by mistake. They are misled by human traffickers, and they end up being in Iraq, especially in Kurdistan region of Iraq. So we try to provide support to them. Most refugees, if not all refugees in Iraq, they think of Iraq as a temporary station. All of them, almost all of them, they want to resettle in a third country. So what we do mainly is to provide psychosocial support to them, also emergency aid, different forms of emergency aid, and also legal aid. So that's our focus on refugees in Iraq. Through Mercy Hands America, we also provide support to refugees here in the US, mostly Iraqi and Syrian, but recently also Afghani refugees. The kind of support we provide here, Mercy Hands America here is a smaller NGO, so um, our services are not really extensive, but basically we provide medical and psychosocial support to individual refugees here, Iraqi, Syrian, and Afghani. And we also do some research and surveys to gather more information about the situation of refugees here. And I can tell you, I directly interact and with refugees, and I can tell you, the problem is really big, and it's really sad what's going on. Many nonprofits here and also governmental agencies, they provide support to refugees here, but really I like to call their support as passive support. I mean, they offer all these services to refugees, but they don't really go out there and try to help refugees or identify refugees who need help. And actually, majority of the refugees here, they do have issues, psychosocial issues. I mean, I read reports about the prevalence of PTSD, depression, and anxiety among refugees here, and they talk about, like the percentage can be 50% plus minus. But honestly, based on my interaction with refugees, I would say the the vast majority of refugees here, whether Iraqi, Syrian, or Afghani, they have some level of psychological or psychiatric disorders, whether it's PTSD, anxiety, depression, and others. But to be able to identify them, I mean, you need to approach them probably like in an active. You should have an active approach to these issues rather than passive. I mean, I hear from the refugees here that nonprofits here in the U.S. They offer all these kinds of services, but then they depend on refugees to step forward and ask for help. And majority of refugees, they don't do that for different reasons. It's not the time or the place to discuss these reasons, but we end up with really sad situations. And I have so many, sad stories that I can share with all of you. But the most recent one was an Afghani refugee, but not post August 21 wave of refugees, but prior to that. He was in the U.S. For a couple of years, and he had a medical condition. He couldn't breathe. He was in mid 20s. He couldn't breathe. He turned blue, according to his wife, and still he would not go to the hospital, to the emergency room. Although he had insurance, it was provided by a nonprofit here in Georgia, but he wouldn't go to the emergency room because he was afraid that the copay will be very high, and he just didn't have money to pay. So he ended up dying. I mean, they took him to the hospital, and he was gasping for air. He was barely breathing, and by the time he arrived to the hospital, he was already dead. They tried to resuscitate him. They were able to, resuscitate. His brain was dead already, so his heart started beating again, and he was on the ventilator. He was dependent on the ventilator, but eventually the family, they had to make the decision to take him off the ventilator, and he was announced dead. It was really, that's just one story, and I think it's really representative of what's going on with refugees in general, not just Afghani. I mean, I have similar stories for Syrian and Iraqi refugees here in Georgia and elsewhere in other states. You know, we assume here in the U.S., us who've been here for years and we resettled and integrated well within the community, we assume that those refugees, they know some basics. We think of them as basics, like, you know, the copay, for example. Or I had a family, they didn't leave their apartment for a few days, not even going, you know, in the front yard, because they didn't have IDs, and they were under the impression that they can't leave the house without an ID. And I had to go and like help them get some food for them because they were so afraid. The kids wanted to go out, you know, and play in the garden, but their parents wouldn't let them go out because they didn't have IDs. So, I mean, they need the refugees here for, you know, we're talking about, I mean, our focus today is the resettlement process. We need to do more to help the Afghanis resettle here in the US. We need to be more active and engaging with the Afghanis if we want to help them resettle here and integrate within the community. So, I mean, that's my personal account, and I'm open for any questions.
I congratulate you.
Thank you.
On the work that you are doing, because if one person needs help and you go out and help that person, you deserve the thanks and congratulations of everybody. And you're doing more than one person. You're helping hundreds, if not thousands. I know what Mercy Help is doing, and it's great work. Just don't forget the point that I'm making, which is that the problem of Afghanistan has to be solved in Afghanistan itself, and not with the refugees in Canada, United States, Pakistan, or anywhere else. Over to you for a question from your end.
Thank you. Any questions, Mohammed, before you leave?
Thank you very much. It was a great presentation for with Mr. Kamal and Mr. Khalid Moussaoui. I'm sorry I have to go in 5 minutes. I have another meeting, and it's a pleasure always to have a discussion with Afghanistan, Mr. Kamal. Of course, the Afghanistan conflict and issue cannot be solved in Canada or in a third country or in Islamabad headquarters. It should be resolved in Afghanistan. But unfortunately, this proxy and hybrid war has pushed the country deeper into such a catastrophe that what is happening now, unfortunately. And well, approximately every one of us around the world is responsible for what's happening in that part of the world.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I also
thank you so much. And
go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Al-Moussaoui or Khaldoun. I think that's one of the points of this webcast is a tutorial to help organizations who may be involved in resettlement, and hopefully also helping the people in Afghanistan by being proactive and you know, how we can help them restore. That it's just not a process, it's a really holistic, so, and things that we may take for granted. I just got contacted recently saying, oh, do you know anyone who speaks Pashtun? They knew that they were resettling the refugees 4 months ago, that they would be coming in January. And these are like, oh, just something like language, let alone knowing how do you operate in the United States? What would you do if you go to the hospital? Or if, you know, so many little points that are basic that we take for granted that will be new to them, and how to just survive and live in the United States. It's not easy.
Yes, but may I add a point? Major decisions have to be taken on the question of the Afghans. I mentioned that you have to concentrate on opening small factories in Afghanistan, but governments have to take decisions also. The government of Pakistan Pakistan is a long country, 1,000 miles across, more than almost 2,000 miles north to south. And a lot of trade takes place across roads in trucks. And so the government of Pakistan took the decision that we would allow Afghans to operate trucks on Pakistani roads. And the result is that today, all the trucks on Pakistani roads, all the trade is being conducted by Afghans in their trucks. So trade has been taken over by Afghanistan truckers. So that sort of thing is what helps ultimately resolve a problem of a territory in which 40 million people need our help.
Thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Dr. Karen Fondacaro. She is a professor of psychological science at the University of Vermont. She's also a director of the Littenberg Center for Evidence-Based Practice, and she is the director of Connecting Cultures. And she will discuss her experience in trauma evaluation for the first group of refugees that have arrived in Vermont. Karen?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to the speakers already. It's been fascinating to hear everything that you have to say. So I am going to talk a little bit about what we have done in terms of very specific to mental health and well-being for refugees who are here in Vermont and the New England area. And I actually put together a little slide show. Is that okay to share some of those screens?
Yeah.
I think I need access to do that.
Let me see if I can.
You can give me power to share.
Oh, I'm going to try to do that.
Being an academician, I've always got like slides to show. So,
okay, so we want to share. I will do that.
It just says the multiple participants can share, I think is the button.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great. So I put together a little presentation here. And obviously in 10 minutes, I'm not going to be able to speak extensively, but I think as, was it Haldoun who said that refugees aren't going to come and get services? We really need to do outreach and really go to the communities. Am I getting that right, or did I get the wrong name there?
Yes, ma'am, you got it right.
Yeah, and I think that was so important. And in 2007, we started a program called Connecting Cultures because we knew that there were extensive mental health, and we typically try to call it well-being needs for refugee individuals, but individuals who were not comfortable seeking services. So we really had to go out into the communities and work with the communities and talk to them about their perceptions of mental health and well-being in order to get a program going so that people could access services. So we started a program called Connecting Cultures and really went into the communities for years. We have about 30 countries of origin in Vermont now of resettled refugees. And it really took off from there, growing into us working with legal services and also with physical health, and in particular, physical therapy for folks who end up with chronic pain associated with maybe a torture experience, for example. And so we now are providing mental health services, psychological services, case management, really for basic needs, and then working with other organizations to make sure that we're providing holistic interventions. But the types of evaluations that we do for trauma include two different kinds. One is an evaluation for treatment or intervention, or what is the individual or the family or the community's need. And the other one is we also participate in psychological asylum evaluations. So for those asylum seekers who are seeking asylum, we work with attorneys and prepare the psychological evaluations. But first, I'm going to talk about the the evaluation that we do of trauma for specifically for what we would do for intervention or working with the communities. And specifically with the Afghan refugees coming into Vermont, again, we have refugees from over 30 countries, but the Afghan refugees, I've been told, we're going to be getting about 100 individuals, with about 40% being children. So we really have a similar model, but we actually use a model for children that's very tier-based. It's 4 different tiers, and it's called trauma systems therapy. And the evaluation is that different kids need different things. So really, we start with the broader bottom you can see of the pyramid, which is really getting those kids who are doing okay engaged in the community, whether it's sports or music or any kind of making sure that they're engaged socially and that they're doing okay and doing okay in school. So that's really the evaluation of sort of that group of kids. And then there's another group in sort of the second tier, which is typically a little smaller, but these are the kids who we go into the schools and actually set up school-based groups. And we have to work with the schools. We work with cultural brokers. We work with the Association of Africans Living in Vermont. And that's a resettlement agency, an ethnic community where we really work with individuals who are part of the refugee community too, and with interpreters. So in those groups, the evaluation really points at those kids needing to be able to talk openly about acculturative stress. What's it like in a new country? What are they being discriminated against? And being able to talk with amongst themselves as kids, but also with a cultural broker and also someone who's skilled at doing the groups. And then the third tier we engage in with children is really a school-based. They may need some counseling. Maybe they can't focus on their work. Maybe they're having some flashbacks, really getting mental health intervention, but in the school. And then the highest tier of evaluation and intervention is where we would go into the homes and work with the whole family system and sometimes into the community. And this is when a child or an adolescent is really struggling with not being able to integrate into the school system. And we work with Boston Children's Hospital, who developed this trauma system therapy for refugees, and also with Dr. Saida Abdi. And our director of family and children's services really is working through a SAMHSA grant that we got. And I think it's really going to be a wonderful model for making sure that we reach as many kids as we can. Now, for adults, when we're really doing our evaluation of what is the need, we really have to use cultural humility and ask questions, not pretend we know what's going on for someone. So what is your view of the problem? What does well-being mean to you, to your family, to your community, or your culture? How does spirituality play into this? We really have to approach it with questions, and we have to use cultural brokers to understand the different cultures. It's sometimes challenging because we have so many different cultures, but now all of our clinicians in our program, individuals working in the program, really do need to learn about Afghanistan and the culture, and also listen to people who are believe it or not, now people do seek services from us because they've learned from family members or community members that we're a safe place to come to. And we also have satellite offices closer to the communities. But we really do use what we call a biopsychosocial spiritual model, and really making sure, and I think as Yvonne said before, that we are attending to spirituality and listening to people's spirituality in the process of healing too. And then someone did say specifically, and I think it was Haldoon again, that the most common Western defined mental health concerns that we see are post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. And that is really the case for a number of folks. And one of the things that's been very important to us and that we've learned over time is that we don't believe it's a disorder that needs to be fixed. We think what's disordered are the wars and all the challenges that people have had to face. The experiences are what is disordered, not the individuals that we're dealing with, and that we need to have a holistic lens. So in addition to some of these issues that some individuals are definitely experience and that we're looking at, we also realize that it's not, whereas post-traumatic stress sometimes indicates that it's in the past, what we have found is that some of these concerns are more chronic. People are still experiencing loss and lots of grief and ongoing concerns. So we've developed a model based on what we've seen. And really what we've seen is tremendous resilience and strength, amazing resilience and strength of refugees coming to Vermont in particular, because that's who we're working with. But the other things that we see is that people are grieving over loss of their family members. They're grieving over loss of their culture and their home. They're sometimes being welcomed into poverty, which is a problem, and I think speaks to the issue that the ambassador spoke about, which is we have this two-system need, which is to assist in Afghanistan, but also when individuals are here, we need to holistically provide the support so that they can be successful. They're adjusting to a new culture. There's unemployment. There's loss now due to the pandemic. If we look at contextual factors, individuals are coming with very serious torture experiences and some experiencing traumatic stress, flashbacks, nightmares, dissociation. So many different concerns that they're struggling with. And we do believe that we have to look at it, that these can be sort of ongoing issues and that it's not that we're just looking at something that happened in the past. So we have developed a model and we have this, an app that we've developed with it, and we are working with individuals as best as we can. And then, so that's the evaluation of traumatic stress that we'll do with both children and with adults and adolescents, and also provide the intervention in the communities and in the homes. And then we also, the other kind of evaluation we do is for this psychological asylum eval for those who are seeking asylum. And those are extremely challenging to do and to be part of. If you're the person being evaluated, they're very challenging because it's where the person is telling their torture story. And very briefly, I'll just tell you that we engage in these evaluations to assist the legal process. And what we find is that for those cases that have a psychological evaluation, these individuals are more likely to receive asylum. And the process is we work with a lawyer, we have discussions with an interpreter, we take down detailed notes, and we actually write an evaluation of the trauma and torture history. And it goes along with the person with their affidavit and the legal team that goes and presents themselves in front of an immigration attorney. And the evaluations take quite a bit of time. And our clinicians and our team, I think the biggest thing that they learn is how to tolerate the intensity of the emotions that come with trauma and torture, because it's such a challenging, these are challenging stories that people are talking about. We've also developed treatment, but I'm not going to get into our treatment development today, but we've developed treatments with our cultural brokers, and certainly have published a lot of this most recently. And it's been an intense experience for me, what I value and have the most passion for in terms of my job. And I just hope that some of the work that we do can assist these folks.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. I think one of the points that you brought out about trauma, and that it's not just about the past. I mean, just being here is a traumatic experience, and every single element. And as Dr. Haldun Masawi pointed out, just these basic things like going to a hospital, what will I need? What the trauma is like almost every day. There's another form of trauma. It's like, how do you transcend? So I think it's, I guess, building a resilience. It's, of course, it's your job, but the pathway to resilience, when you've just dealt with turmoil and you've got more turmoil and it's ongoing. So I think it is definitely one of the challenges that everyone who is going to be supporting the integration into the United States or in any other country for refugees.
Yeah, the one thing that I would add to, and I think when I think about people who are working with resettled refugees, many people think that, oh, I need to get them to tell their story. And I always think of it as no one asked for a story that includes trauma and torture, and they should really have control over when they talk about it and who they want to talk to about it. And I think that's a really important thing for people to also recognize when, because I know some people get it in their head that, oh, it's good for people to talk about their trauma. And that can be true, but the person really has to have control over it themselves.
And that could also be cultural. Certain cultures, they like to talk about everything. And certain cultures, they don't talk about their lives personally. You could go on a train in the United States and somebody will tell you their whole life story, and then they'll get off the train, say bye. But that wouldn't necessarily happen in another culture. This is very personal and I don't know who you are and why am I sharing this story with you? So,
and that's the cultural responsiveness and humility, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Humility is key to helping someone crossing barriers. So our next speaker is Mr. Zahur Hussain, and Aga Jafri, you will give some commentary, but Zahur is working also with the refugee resettlement in Connecticut. And Zahur, would you like to share some reflections and observations of this process?
Yes. Well, I've been with the group for a while that they resettled the refugees from Afghanistan here with the families. But before, I've been listening to everyone, and this is the first time that I am involved in, refugee settlements. And by listening to you guys have a lot of experience. But a lot of the things that you talk about is different than what I've experienced, because being on the ground and being in the United States is totally different. We take things and say, hey, you know what? This is what is necessary for the people that are coming in. In my opinion, it is to understand a culture is totally different than what we see. When you bring out a family here, and I have been working with families that are here, and it's totally different. Some people are here because of the torture, as she said, and some people are here because they want to have a better life. When it comes to Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, or Yemen, or wherever the refugees are from, we need to understand better. We can't just, say, hey, this is what they need. The first thing is to understand a culture. Afghanistan has 52 different dialects in Pashto. It is a very difficult language when it comes to understanding, because just like in Arabic, if you go from Iraq to Syria, the dialect changes and the word meaning changes. So when you talk to people, you have to understand what they are saying. I've been translating for this group, and some of the things that they tell me, the Pashtun people, the refugees, they say, hey, it is really, really hard for me to understand the person that is talking to me. And to translate one word, sometimes it becomes a paragraph. And that paragraph, when you are talking about it, it's an explanation of broad things for the other person to understand. I, as an interpreter, or who've been to Afghanistan on ground for 4 years, I've seen the best, I've seen the worst. But I cannot change it because my job was just to, translate it or interpret it into what the understanding would be. Ala Jafri has invited me, and this is the first time that I'm here, and I am just at a loss of words to say, well, Afghanistan needs fixing. No, Afghanistan needs dialogue. It needs to, I am sorry if I tell you this, that, hey, women's rights are not acceptable. No, they are. But you cannot go into a culture and say, hey, you know what, we need to do this for the woman first. No, you need to go and talk to the men, talk to the people that are above or who are governing. You need to make them understand first before you install something. The refugees are great. Right now, I think we have about 20,000 people at certain camps, in Georgia and Virginia, Texas. I think there are some in Alabama. So 20,000 people is a great thing that, you bring them over, but it's not enough because, you got 40 million over there. And I don't know if I'm speaking in the right connotation, but, or the right, for me to say something, but this is what I've observed. And I've been working here as a volunteer with Danbury, the Irish, the Integrated Immigration and the Integrated Refugees and Immigration Society, who is in Danbury, and they just have few families that are coming in. But it's hurry up and wait is the kind of situation when it comes to the refugees. Anything other than that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe
Aga, would you like to make any reflections?
Yes, I have a very brief commentary on our dialogue over here. You know me, my name is Aga Jafri. I've been associated with, I'm a community health worker. That's community worker, really, basically, nothing more than that. I've been involved with the Al-Hui Benevolent Foundation for the last 40 years, ever since their, inception. And they are, Mr. Musvi is around. He should know, if he's around, he should know about the Al-Hui Foundation. And you have also yourself worked with them. They are into Iraq, into Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. I didn't hear Yemen word at all in the discussion until Zahur mentioned that. I personally think that no one society or one group should have a monopoly or persecution. I mean, we have got these refugees coming from, of course, the Afghanis have the currency and the most recent, trauma and tragedy, and we are doing the best we can as a society. Al-Hui Foundation, by the way, is a special status NGO. Okay, do you know that in 40 years they have not received a simple? They are a specialist. They have not received a single penny of grant either from the UN or from the US government, that is US aid and the State Department, not at all. They work on the Khums money. You need a Shia to understand that what Khums is. It's like zakat. And all that money is spent. Let's say Sistani is a Marja, a Taqlid, and he is in, as you know, in Najaf, Iraq, and he has been shelling out that money, millions of dollars. I would say about $1 billion is money going out. I've been there. I've been to Najaf. I'm a Pakistani. I'm not an Arab. And I have seen some amazing work that they do. They're working in Yemen right now. They have been working in Afghanistan for a long time and everywhere. These people really, I don't want to say that, but I know NGOs, Ivan, there are NGOs, and there are NGOs. I mean, how sincere they are, some of them, I really wonder. I know NGOs whose keepers stay, when they come to Manhattan, they stay in Waldorf Astoria, and they jump from one meeting to another meeting. Is their real work is being done or not? You come to Al-Hui Foundation, it's Maidan Hashr. It is, they really are what you call basic, and they are doing the amount of money they have shelled out, you will not believe it, as Khums money. And that's what we need to people. The Ambassador Kamal have outlined as to how we should have these service delivery network, and they should be effective and they should be done. We should spend more money in giving it to people, the needy people, than managing and running these classy NGOs. That's all.
Thank you so much, Aga Jafri. I agree with you that the most important part of this, and I know Khaldoon knows this, is to stay mission driven and not to make your mission about raising money, but first about serving the people. And I know that Khaldoon believes this wholeheartedly, and Karen as well. And I think in terms of the Afghan refugees, just briefly, we are also being considered as an interim resettlement agency in Vermont. And I think one of the reasons is that most of the people with Grace Initiative have worked in post-conflict countries and have worked with refugees or IDPs. And I myself have worked on 5 UN missions. But what makes the Afghan and probably also Iraq, but the Afghan situation, I think, particularly heart-wrenching, if we want to say that, if they're the refugee of the day or something, is that I think for the United States, and as Kamal pointed out, Ambassador Kamal pointed out, this kind of results from an intervention. And this intervention was from 9/11, and we never had a reconciliation for 9/11. The United States, Americans never came together to find peace, to reconcile within themselves from this intervention. But then we set out to go into Afghanistan and spend 20 years there. And ironically, 20 years later, we're taking in the refugees from this intervention. So in a way, it's kind of bringing closure to 9/11. Paradoxically, it's not on purpose, of course, but the reconciliation and understanding these people, everything they have gone through, it's really important for the people, especially in the United States or other countries who have been involved in the intervention in Afghanistan, to really make this process as positive as possible for the communities in which they are resettling and for the individual Afghans and their families, so that perhaps we can all move forward, transcending all of our traumas together. This is much as a kind of a personal point of view. So are there any other comments? We're going to conclude. Would anyone else?
Yeah, I just wanted, if you don't mind, Yvonne, I just wanted to, well, thank you so much, Mr. Aga and Karen, for the great presentation. I just wanted to say, about the scarce funding. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. About the scarce funding, that goes to what, Karen was saying about her approach, the holistic approach. Sometimes, and what Yvonne as well said about being mission driven, we do simple activities that don't require a lot of funding, but they have big impact. For example, we've done it before with Palestinian refugees here. We go look for well-established or wealthy Palestinian refugees, and then we ask them to share their story with new refugees, and to act as a role model for the new refugees. And we've noticed, that was very helpful by those wealthy refugees or well-established refugees sharing their stories with the new refugees. That gives hope for the new refugees that resettlement will be easy, and then they can be just like that role model. And it's not just that, bringing those wealthy or well-established refugees with young new refugees and bringing them together. We've noticed, most of those wealthy or well-established refugees, they have businesses here in the US, and they offer job opportunities for those young refugees. So, doing such activities that's not that doesn't require a lot of funding, but it has big impact on refugees and refugees resettlement process. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, when you just brought that up, Haldun, I was thinking of the Women's Training Center that we had the great opportunity to collaborate with Mercy Hands in Basra. But something like that would also be would provide a good model in the United States, where there's training, vocational training, small cottage industry development, childcare, language. And this also would kind of integrate some of Ambassador Kamal's points of view that people have to become self-subsistence and have their own businesses. And that's another form of healing, becoming less reliant on agencies and becoming more self-reliant. This segment is particularly important in view of the recent passing of Nobel laureate Archbishop Desmond Tutu and his extraordinary works in reconciliation and healing. Canon Walter Brownridge of the Vermont Diocese will offer some reflections of Desmond Tutu as his guidance relates to refugee resettlement. Reverend Canon Walter Brownridge is the canon to the ordinary for cultural transformation of the Vermont Episcopal Diocese. Previously, Walter has served congregations in Ohio, Delaware, New York City, and South Africa, and for 5 years was Dean of St. Andrew's Cathedral in Honolulu, Hawaii. Prior to his ordination, Walter practiced law for 10 years as a federal prosecutor and in the area of public policy, and served as a lieutenant in the U.S. Marine Corps. Cultural transformation is a 21st century way of describing our mission, and together we will seek to restore the dream of God for all of us and the world. So now, Walter, we're waiting for your remarks.
Thank you, Yvonne. It's a pleasure to be with you, and for all those who will be watching this, thank you for allowing me to share some thoughts with you. I want to talk about three things very briefly. First, I think that whether you are a religious person, and if you're religious, whatever faith you have, or if there's no faith, if you're strictly a secular person, that we are all called to be really human, and the best version of being a human being. And so I want to talk about the humanitarian aspect of this work. Secondly, my experience of having lived and worked in South Africa in the mid to 2000s, and then my continual work visiting and studying and teaching there off and on, about how the practical impact of a society that struggles sometimes with refugees, but how that we're called to still be, as Yvonne would say, of being able to welcome the stranger, and how that's our call. And then I'll end thirdly with just a remembrance about Archbishop Tutu and how he always reminded us that this is what we need to be about. So I would just first say, as groups who are working in this area of humanitarian, whether secular or religious, the idea is that we are called to this place, this rock that we float in the universe within, is a fragile place. It's our island home. And for a variety of reasons, environmental, the climate crisis, war, famine, whatever reasons, we are living through this greatest sense of migration and refugee growth in numbers that we've ever experienced, of people having to move for a variety of reasons. And particularly as the war in Afghanistan, the United States involvement and in it ended, creating another pressure point of deep human tragedy and need. And so I commend those who've been willing to step forward and welcome the stranger and offer their homes and communities as a place. It's what we're called to do if we together on this planet, regardless of our nation, our community, creed or no creed, whatever it is, if we can be that kind of welcoming body. Secondly, I will say that when I served in Cape Town, South Africa, on the staff of the cathedral, St. George the Martyr, the Anglican cathedral there, in 2003 to 2006, we had a lot of outreach and ministry to refugees who had come from various parts of Africa normally, places like the DRC and Rwanda, Burundi, the Sudan, parts of Kenya and Uganda, all who were seeking refuge, sanctuary from wars and other forms of oppression and danger. And they were coming into the nation, into the large cities in particular, like Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, for example. And there was sometimes concern. There were folks who complained, as often is the case, about the arrival of refugees. But both civil society, leaders in our community, as well as the government, who had been involved in the anti-apartheid struggle to end that brutal system. So many of them during the 1950s and 60s and 70s and 80s had to flee South Africa for their lives and were exiled. And so they were refugees for political reasons in other countries. And so I was fondly remembering when Africa Day, which comes around in May each year, which celebrates all the nations of Africa, and it's sponsored by the African Union to celebrate a unity that we hope that they could achieve. In South Africa, one of the themes was that we should celebrate Africa Day. And one way we do that is by welcoming the refugees, because the people coming from these various countries where they don't have a home now, welcome the heroes, the freedom fighters who had to flee South Africa during the old apartheid days, and they were welcomed into those communities. And so now it was South Africa's turn to exchange the favor. And I just thought that was just a wonderful image that of this circularity of life. And it's not simply in Africa where this happens, but all over the world, including the United States. We are a nation that has often accepted not only immigrants, but refugees. And that's because except for the indigenous community, everyone else in the United States is from somewhere else as well for a variety of reasons. And I'll lastly just make this comment. As we are now 4 days away from the death of my mentor, role model, friend, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who I had the pleasure of working with when I worked in South Africa, but then for years after that of bringing students over to meet him when I was a seminary dean and when I was a cathedral dean, and also before that as a faculty member of welcoming him to the places I served. Archbishop Desmond, one of the great gifts he gave us was to popularize the term called Ubuntu, which is a Bantu word, which at its root means people. And it is really one word that describes humanism and humanitarianism in the African context. And it's difficult to translate into English, but the best way he would describe it is that a person is only a person through other persons. That Yvonne, you are a human being because I and other human beings recognize you as such and respect you and grant you the dignity of being another human being. And I can only understand myself as a human being because you recognize my inherent dignity as a human being. And so as we honor and mourn, and our hearts are mixed with both sadness and gratitude. One way we can honor the arch as he liked to be called, or Father Desmond, is by respecting the dignity and humanity of others who will come here as refugees. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your reflections and guidance. And we look forward to you collaborating with us when we have the opportunity to resettle refugees from Afghanistan. So thank you so much. And with this, we will conclude our webcast. Okay, so we're going to conclude this. If there's any final comments, I would really like to thank so much Ambassador Kamal for your participation and insight and reflections. And Mohammed has left, but we also reach out and say thank you so much, Mohammed. Dr. Khaldoun Al-Musawi from Mercy Hands for Humanitarian Aid, Dr. Karen Fondacaro from Connecting Cultures and University of Vermont, with Zahur Hussein for your reflections on your practical experience, and of course, Aga Jaffrey. Thank you so much. And we will now conclude our webcast. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.